During the Clone Wars, the CIS Navy often enjoyed major advantages over the Republic Navy, giving the Separatists an advantage for much of the war. For the most part, this was simply because the Confederacy had roughly 4 times as many warships as the Republic did, but the Separatists had some cunning tacticians on their side as well, the likes of General Grievous and Admiral Trench. But with that said, not every command officer in the CIS Navy was on their level. Many others were as incompetent as the Empire's Admiral Ozzel. In this video, we'll be taking a look at all of the Separatists' named naval command officers and ranking them from worst to best.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
We're going to divide our CIS naval commanders into 5 tiers. A few we don't have enough information about to judge, and then the terrible, the mediocre, the skilled, and finally, the legends. We're going to go through the categories in that order, starting with the ones we just don't have enough information about to judge. First, we have TJ-912, a tactical droid that commanded the Separatist defense fleet over Salust during the battle there in 21 BBY. In the middle of the battle, on orders from Darth Sidious, Count Dooku commanded TJ-912 to execute Asajj Ventress, and she complied, destroying the Separatist fleet's command ship and then withdrawing from Salust. In the process, TJ-912 lost the battle, but she did so on orders from Dooku, so that doesn't really say anything about her tactical abilities. Our other largely unknown Separatist flag officer was General Cully Trilm, who, despite having an army title, was a fleet commander in charge of a unit called the Clissom Fleet. Nothing is known about her command record, but after she was captured by Republic forces, she was locked up on the Prism, a top-secret Republic military prison where the galaxy's most dangerous convicts were stored. This suggests that General Trilm was a pretty fearsome commander, but since we have no concrete proof of that, we don't have the information to rank her definitively. With those two out of the way, let's move on to the main event, starting with the worst of the Confederacy's naval commanders. At the absolute bottom of the list, we have Admiral Kursk, the owner of the smoothest brain in the Confederate Navy. Kursk was the commander of the battleship Starcrusher, one of the most feared ships in the fleet, which amassed such a reputation that the Republic sent a strike team to infiltrate and destroy it. Admiral Kursk anticipated this, however, and prepared a trap. He lured the Republic strike team to a decoy vessel that was programmed to fly itself into a nearby star once the Jedi were aboard. What earns him the bottom spot on this list is that, despite the fact the Jedi were after the ship and not Kursk himself, he decided to stay on the decoy until the trap was sprung, after which he fled in an escape pod. Kursk had the real Starcrusher come in to pick him up, a fatal mistake since, in the process, the battleship had to get close enough to the decoy for the Jedi aboard to capture it with the decoy's tractor beams. Both ships ended up flying into the star, and Admiral Kursk was killed in the process. He may have had a good record before the Starcrusher's destruction, but this last plan of his was so monumentally terrible that it outweighs every victory he won. Next up, we have a super tactical droid by the name of Aut-O, the commander of a fleet that was involved in a Separatist plot to attack a Republic strategy conference over Karita in 20 BBY. Not much is known about Aut-O's career, but it came to a swift end when D-Squad, a unit of misfit Republic droids, infiltrated his flagship, stole a critical data module, killed Aut-O and his guards, and then escaped. For the dishonor of having been so thoroughly outwitted by D-Squad, of all units, Aut-O gets a spot near the bottom of this list. Our next bottom tier commander was Lieutenant Melor Yago, who assumed command of the Rendili Home Defense Fleet during the Battle of Rendili. After Rendili experienced a Separatist coup, the commander of the Rendili fleet, Captain J. Stalin, was initially neutral before deciding to report the Republic, but Yago and much of the crew opposed this decision. Lieutenant Yago and his supporters staged a mutiny, taking Dallin, Plo Koon, and a Jedi diplomatic team hostage before starting a standoff with the Republic Navy. This led to the Battle of Rendili, in which Plo Koon, Dallin, and the other hostages ultimately freed themselves, killed Iago, and retook the ship. All told, Iago was a rather lackluster commander. He staged a successful mutiny and then promptly blew it. He did a poor job of keeping Dallin and the Jedi secure, and his entire plan hinged on General Grievous sending him reinforcements that would take out the Republic fleet for him. When that didn't work, Iago's plan B was just to flee Rendili with the fleet in tow, and that plan didn't work either. Granted, Iago was probably out of his depth, but he still choked pretty hard. Rounding out the bottom tier, we have Captain Rel Harsol, the commander of the Munificent-class star frigate Sar Nalaor. Harsol was a fairly distinguished officer, having served aboard the Invisible Hand before winning his own command, but we've ranked him near the bottom for a simple reason. He and his crew deserted the Confederacy at the end of the Clone Wars, stockpiling credits from the cybernetics lab the Sar Nalaor was meant to protect and fleeing Chol Gunner. Harsol may have been a good captain, but desertion tends to leave a stain on one's military record. Moving up a tier, we have a few mediocre Separatist commanders, the ones that were at least competent, but whose performance still left much to be desired. We'll start with Captain Ma Tuk, the captain of the CIS fleet over Ryloth during the Techno-Union occupation there. Tuk was a fairly good commander, and he came up with a pretty great defensive strategy. He only staged part of his fleet in orbit over Ryloth, making the planet look poorly defended and giving any attackers a false sense of confidence. Then, once the enemy committed, Tuk called the rest of his fleet in to bracket and destroy the enemy force. It was a good plan that thwarted the Republic's first bid to break the blockade, but it was also the sort of trick that could only work once, and Ma Tuk didn't seem to have any other plans up his sleeve. More importantly, he fell hook, line, and sinker for Anakin Skywalker's own gambit during the Republic's counterattack, which led to the destruction of his flagship. Tuk himself survived, having fled to an escape pod before his ship was destroyed, but instead of attempting to contact the rest of his fleet and give them new orders, he left the droid commanders of the other ships to their own devices, which allowed Republic forces to break his blockade. All told, Ma Tuk was a pretty mid commander. Not terrible, but not great either. Speaking of captains that got utterly outmaneuvered by the Jedi, we have Captain Cantival, who commanded Separatist forces in a mission to the gas giant Talaran. Cantival attempted to set a trap for the Republic Star Destroyer Resolute in the upper atmosphere of Talaran, but after the Resolute learned of Cantival's plan, the captain was left without the element of surprise and his ship was crippled in the ensuing shootout. Cantival's cruiser plummeted into Talaran's mantle, where it was destroyed. All told, a fairly disappointing performance, though it could have been worse. Next up, we have Captain Karvik Toth, the commander of the Sabaoth Squadron, a mercenary fleet aligned with the Confederacy. Toth signed on with the Trade Federation shortly before the Battle of Geonosis, overseeing a bioweapons program and conducting tests on remote colonies. During the Battle of Geonosis, Count Dooku summoned Toth and his fleet of flying war crimes to the planet, ordering him to use the Trade Federation's bioweapons to level the battlefield and wipe out the Republic's new army. However, shortly after it arrived above Geonosis, Sabaoth Squadron got utterly dunked on by Adi Gallia, a squadron of Jedi pilots, and a fleet of pirates that Toth had harassed during the weapons tests. The entirety of Sabaoth Squadron was destroyed, and Karvik Toth was killed, earning him the dubious distinction of being the Confederacy's first naval officer to get utterly outmaneuvered by the Jedi. Rounding out the mid-tier, we have Admiral Pors Tonith, a man with a very high opinion of himself, but without the performance record to match. Admiral Tonith commanded Separatist forces in the Battle of Praesitlin, in which he attempted to take a major communications hub for the Confederacy. Tonith's initial assault on the planet was successful, in part due to his strategy, which saw him lure Praesitlin's defense forces in with a feint before landing his main army behind them, catching them in a brutal pincer movement. However, he also had the advantage of overwhelming numbers, and that was mainly what he relied on for the rest of the battle, particularly during the Republic's counterattack. Despite this, Admiral Tonith was a careful planner, and he even kept hostages in his command center in order to keep himself safe, counting on the Jedi commanding the Republic force to avoid attacking him directly if it meant risking innocent lives. Unfortunately for him, the Jedi in charge was Anakin Skywalker, who ultimately decided to storm the base single-handedly to free the hostages. In the process, he captured Admiral Tonith and he defeated the Admiral's forces shortly thereafter. Tonith's defeat at Praesitlin cost the CIS a ton of ships and droids, and not to mention control of a strategically important planet, so despite his tactical acumen, we're only ranking him at the top of mid-tier. Now we move on to the more capable naval officers, beginning with the tactical droid TF-1726. This droid commanded a Separatist fleet during the Battle of Quell, utterly routing a Republic fleet led by Jedi General Aayla Secura. His tactics in this battle were pretty good for a tactical droid. He positioned his ships well and made good use of boarding parties and overwhelming firepower. His victory in his only known battle was fairly impressive, but admittedly, the real reason he gets a high ranking is for one specific line.
This is taking too long. Destroy that cruiser.
But sir, there are still hundreds of droids on board.
I don't care.
Roger, roger.
Moving on, we have Captain Lashros Dauphine. The cousin of Dulce Dauphine, the captain of the Trade Federation blockade of Naboo, Lashros Dauphine was the captain of the Invisible Hand, General Grievous's flagship, a role that Grievous handpicked him for. In contrast to the usual Nemoidian stereotypes, Lashros Dauphine was a calm, level-headed, and extremely competent commander, renowned for his uncanny ability to know exactly when to hold his ground and when to retreat. During the Battle of Geonosis, Dauphine commanded one of the last Trade Federation core ships to flee the planet, sticking around long enough to give General Grievous a lift. Dauphine fended off a Republic attack on his ship as he fled, and in the process, he impressed Grievous enough that Grievous later chose him to captain his flagship. Dauphine was one of the few Nemoidians Grievous respected, as he wasn't intimidated by the general and was extremely competent. During the Battle of Coruscant, Captain Dauphine assumed command of the Separatist Armada while Grievous was off kidnapping Palpatine, and he oversaw the defense of the Invisible Hand later in the battle. Lashros Dauphine was ultimately killed in the battle as his escape pod was destroyed by stray turbo laser fire, and his death was a blow to the Confederacy. At the top of this tier, we have Admiral Dua Ningo, the commander of the Techno Union's Bulwark fleet. Ningo spent most of the war trapped on Forost, which the Republic had under blockade, but in 20 BBY, he was able to break the siege with a fleet of state-of-the-art Bulwark-class battle cruisers. With his new fleet, Admiral Ningo embarked on a rampage across Sector Zero, the heart of the Core Worlds, attacking targets a stone's throw away from Coruscant. The Republic was forced to launch a fleet of its prototype Victory-class Star Destroyers a year early to deal with Ningo, and even then, the Bulwark fleet fought the Victory fleet to a draw in battle after battle. Ningo was only defeated after the Victory fleet's commanders caught the Bulwark fleet in a pincer maneuver above Anaxis, killing the old admiral and destroying his fleet. Dua Ningo's sole campaign ultimately ended in his defeat, but he made the Republic tremble before he fell, earning himself a high spot in this ranking. Finally, we move on to the legends, the best officers the Confederate Navy had to offer. We'll start with the commander you probably thought would end up at the top of this list, none other than Admiral Trench. Trench was one of the most feared strategists of his time, a master of fleet tactics and a vicious opponent. He later became infamous during the Andoan Wars, in which he led the forces of the Andoan Spivarelda government in a brutal campaign against the Andoan Free Colonies, routing the Free Forces so brutally that the Republic had to intervene to disarm the Spivarelda. Trench then signed on with the Corporate Alliance as an enforcer, eradicating pirates and commanding trade blockades. He was believed killed when his fleet was defeated by the Jedi in the Battle of Malastare Narrows, but he survived and re-emerged as the commander of the Separatist blockade of Christosis. Trench was believed killed again in the early stages of the Battle of Christosis, in which his flagship was destroyed after he was outmaneuvered in a game of cat and mouse with a stealth ship, but yet again, Trench survived. Trench led Separatist forces to victory in many later battles, but he was eventually killed for real late in the war. All told, Admiral Trench was a strategic genius, and his defeats were few and far between. In all the Confederate Navy, there were only 2 officers who we'd say were better. The first of these was such a gifted commander that Darth Sidious had him killed for fear that he would give the Separatists too much of an advantage. This was Commander Mirai, one of the greatest Mon Calamari commanders of his time, a master of both space and aquatic combat. His tactical genius brought the Mon Calamari many victories in past conflicts with the Quarren, and after he signed on with the Confederacy, he was sent to take one of the Separatists' most important targets, Kamino. Unfortunately for Mirai, Darth Sidious wanted him dead to prevent him from making the CIS too powerful, and so Mirai was given falsified intelligence about his target. This caused Mirai's well-planned attack to fail, and the commander was killed in the process. However, despite having been set up to fail by the Dark Lord of the Sith himself, and despite the Republic knowing that an attack on Kamino was coming in advance, Mirai still almost won. His forces would have taken Tipoca City if it weren't for the surprise deployment of the ARC troopers. That attests to some real tactical genius, earning Mirai the number 2 spot on this list. But there was one Separatist naval commander who was better than Mirai, an officer so gifted and so ruthless that he was feared even more than Count Dooku, General Grievous himself. Grievous gets the number 1 spot on this list for a simple reason. Not only was he frighteningly effective as a naval commander, but the brilliant ways in which he organized the Confederate Navy as a whole were a big part of what allowed all the other high rankers on this list to be effective in their own right. Broad-scale organization plays a huge role in naval warfare, and during the Clone Wars, Grievous was second to none at it. He mixed and matched assets from a wide variety of sources to create a well-balanced armada, and through his direction of fleet movements, he ensured that the Republic was always scrambling to deal with a dozen attacks in a dozen different theaters, scattering its forces and allowing his subordinates to overwhelm the enemy and defeat them. Grievous also personally led the Navy to victory in many battles, including its greatest victory of the war, the Battle of Duro. He was the Separatists' supreme commander for a reason, and he's earned the top spot on this list as well. So that was our look at all the named naval officers of the CIS from worst to best. But what do you think? Do you agree or disagree with any of our rankings? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.